Today I'm going to talk about suspension bushings, the different types, and the appropriate use for each type. Now, for discussion purposes, we're going to talk about the factory rubber bushing, urethane, Delrin, and rod ends. Those are kind of like the main things. And everybody's familiar with urethane. Actually, the full name is polyurethane. I mean, that's like polyurethane. Yeah, got to have that. Everybody has to have that. Here's an example of this is actually a SN95 rear lower control arm. As you can see, it's got the urethane bushings front and rear. And in a minute, I'm going to tell you why that's bad. Polyurethane is a good bushing material if it's moving up and down. An example is this is a front bushing for the S197 front control arm, and when movement is back and forth, straight up and down, this is a great piece to use because it eliminates the softness of the factory bushing, but it's not so super hard. But there is still some dampening of NVH. That's noise, vibration, and harshness. So I mean, it's really good. We use that. We get all our for like front control arms, we use polyurethane. Our IRS upper lower control arms, we use polyurethane, and that's because when the motion's up and down, this is perfect. Now, for something like this on a lower control arm, to me that's a drag racing setup, because if you're going straight forward, I mean, the polyurethane isn't going to move. It's going to be solid, so it's going to give you good forward movement. The issue comes into going around a corner. Now, if I try to twist this, there's no way I can twist that. I mean, it's like rock solid. So what happens when you try to go around a corner with all polyurethane bushings on the back, the axle's not going to move very much, very little. And when the axle stops moving, you run out of suspension and the car gets loose. Thing that people are probably familiar with is Delrin. Delrin is a polymer that's rock hard. You can hear that compared to big difference. This is good. I only recommend it in certain specific applications. For one, it's a lot more expensive. And it's rock hard, so it doesn't press into the control arms like a urethane bushing would do. But it supplies a super solid, again, if we're doing this up and down movement, it's perfect because it's super rock solid. Also, it has some anti-friction qualities to it, so it works really good. And then the one that's the absolute best is rod ends. And I can see how many different ways I can move that rod end, which is why on my rear suspension we use all rod ends. And the reason for that is we get maximum articulation in the axle. The axle is free to move as quickly as it can. So that's why we get good traction in the back, because we're letting the axle move, we're letting the axle work. Now I'm just using this as an example. I had to go through and find a loose one to show you this. The rod ends that we use in our control arms when they're brand new, they're pretty stiff, but because they are Teflon lined, they will loosen up enough that they'll move, but they won't rattle and clang. So that's a rod end. Now what we did have done for a couple of customers that didn't want all rod ends at the back. They wanted some polyurethane for NVH. And what we did is we did a control arm. Now this is the older one with a 3/4 rod end. But we put a urethane bushing at the back. And again, the bushings aren't in here, but it's offset just like we do with the rod end bushings. But now you're saying, wait a second. He said not to use urethane for the rear suspension because it doesn't move. Well, yeah. Being really clever about this, I don't know if you can see that, we actually take and undercut the bushing so that there's a hard center part for going forward, but then also there's some ability for the axle, for the control arm to pivot a little bit. So I don't think you'll see anybody else do that. That's kind of unique to us.